So folks, we are just about ready. This is Sunset Lake at Shearsby Valley, 5 minutes from my house. I don't get to fish here half as much as I would like. And we've got another midweek little match to fish. It's a beautiful lake. It's fishing really well as well, so I thought we'd bring the dog out. We'd have a little day shallow fishing, because I think that is what we're gonna be doing. So I'm limited with baits. This is a bit of a last minute match for me, so I'm a bit limited with baits. I've managed to find a few worms. I've managed to dig out some casters. I found these in the freezer, so I'm not too sure how they're going to play out, but they look okay to me. Hopefully the F1s and the I'd like them. We've not got loads, probably about 2 pints. And then something I'm hoping we'll catch on is sloppy ground bait. Like I say, I'm hoping to catch shallow today. It's a beautiful day for catching shallow, slightly overcast but nice and warm. The target species are I'd and F1s, and I'm hoping with that limited bait supply we should be all right. Plan is chuck little balls of sloppy ground bait at the float, a few casters, fish a bit of worm on the hook, and hopefully get dragged in all day. Right, let's look at the rigs. We've got rigs set at different depths. So this is the rig that I think I'm going to catch quite a few fish on. All 4-inch hook lengths, 0.12 hook lengths to a size 16, 0.16 main line. That says 4x10s on it. It takes a little bit more. 4 number 10s there, 1 under the float. Got that set at, what's that, 30 centimetres, a foot deep. I think that's going to be the depth today for catching the fish. So I've got one of those set up. I've got a light rig set up. This is what I used to catch loads and loads of fish on when I was doing loads of this caster shallow fishing. The old 3B8 Chianti. I've tied the eye in, I've super glued him, cut down the bristle, cut down the stem. Takes 2 number 12s. Hardly any resistance in the float there. Beautiful little float for catching shallow. I've got another rig there set slightly deeper. That's my bolt rig. You can't go for shallow fishing without a jigger, so we've got a jigger set up. And that is about it. You can see there's short lashes on all of them. You can fish a short lash here, there's no limit. So I'm hoping that we get all our bites are just going to pull the elastic out. That's the plan anyway. Dot the float right down. And they feel the elastic before they feel the float, hopefully. So, let's look at the peg. I'm thinking 6 metres out where I can throw that sloppy ground bait, which is Swim Stim F1 Sweet crushed expander. That ground bait creates a really nice soft mix, bright yellow, which I think F1s love as well. So 6 metres out where we can throw that sloppy ground bait. We can throw casters by hand there as well, and then I think we're going to catch down the edge, 5 metres down the edge to the sticky out bit of reeds. That to me looks a nice place to throw a bit of slop and a few casters, and hopefully catch a few fish shallow down the edge as well. Like I say, it's fishing really well. I've been told that shallow is the way to go, and there should be some pretty ravenous fish. Wish me luck. Now, I knew I was in for a busy day's fishing. Numbers is the name of the game on Sunset Lake. There's loads of nice F1s to be caught, but also loads of smaller fish. Smaller eyed, some little tiny carp, some little F1s, little crucians. There's a real mixture of species on Sunset Lake. Fishing shallow, you've got to be busy. So even though I'm fishing 8-inch deep, I want to make sure the rig is falling through the water all the time. Slapping your rig repeatedly, letting it fall through the water, trying to keep a tight line between the pole tip and the float. In actual fact, the pole tip and the hook bait. So when the fish takes the hook bait, feels the pole tip straight away. That was my idea. That was my thinking behind fishing this way. So early on in the session, it was all about building a swim while still catching fish. Lots of the smaller fish. Obviously at Shearsby, you can swing fish in as long as they're not too big. Anything around 3-4 ounce, which there's a lot of those size fish in Sunset, you can swing them in. Now, we're talking little-eyed, some little tiny crucians, maybe the odd little F1, little roach, fish like that. They were on the scene almost straight away, but they're well worth catching because, like I say, it's all about numbers on Sunset, and as you build that swim, we're hoping for some larger F1s to get in on the act, and that's where you're going to make your big weight. Let's talk about feed and hook baits. So my feed is Dynamite Baits F1 Sweet. It's a crust expander, really bright yellow in colour. I've added some chopped worms to that crust expander just to give the fish something to hunt for in the cloud, and I've made the mix really sloppy, just about able to get it out to the distance. Sometimes it's breaking up mid-air, but most of the time it's landing with a lovely splat on or around the float. Feeding every time I hook a fish. I want to keep the feed pretty constant. I want to keep a cloud in the water all the time for me to work my rig in amongst that cloud. Working out what depth the fish are feeding at is going to be crucial. I'm getting a really good response early on at 8 inches deep. Fish are swirling in amongst the cloud already, but what you've not seen is I've started a little bit deeper on that slightly deeper rig, had line bites, and you could just tell fish were already much shallower than that deeper rig. So 8 inches deep seems to be working really well at this point. The rig I'm on, it's that little Chianti rig, really nicely dotted down, small float, hardly any resistance to the fish. And you might say, obviously on some venues where you're allowed to just use a rig with no float, that would probably work brilliantly. Here at Shearsby though, you've got to use a float. So I think that small float has an advantage over something a little bit more bulky. Also, by watching that little tiny pinprick of a float bristle, I can spot little shy bites. Sometimes these smaller fish, these crucian and eyed, they're not pulling the elastic out. They give a little tiny dink on the float. I can lift up and I can hook more fish doing that. Hook bait, head of a worm on a size 16 hook. A little bit of worm head. It's a really resilient bait. I can slap it in the water for long periods of time. I can catch 3, 4, 5 fish on the same piece of worm. It's a fantastic bait when you're fishing in this way.
Now you'll notice throughout this early part of the match that the dog is behaving beautifully. He's sitting there, bottom left hand side of the screen, doing a great job of keeping quiet. He's an old dog, he usually just keeps himself to himself, but I thought instead of leaving him at home on a nice day, I'd bring him out for a very rare trip out on the bank. This is where he shows his true colours though. He becomes a real nuisance for the next 20 or so minutes. Eager to get at any bait, wouldn't sit still, just wanted to get to that F1 sweet ground bait. It looks like he absolutely loves it as much as the F1s do. With the dog well out of the way now, and a mental note not to bring him on a match again, we can now get on with catching a few fish. We've altered our feeding tactics. We're feeding now twice every drop in, and also feeding before we ship out. It's so obvious that those fish are coming straight to that slop. So what I'm doing now is I'm feeding a ball of slop before I ship out. I'm putting my top kit on my pole, feeding a ball of slop, and then slapping my rig straight in that ball of slop. And it's instant bites. The fish are swirling at the bait as it hits the water. It's really good fishing. As soon as I hook a fish, I'm trying to feed a ball of slop as well. I'm trying to keep that cloud in the water all the time. Rig wise, we've tried a jigger, we've tried that more aggressive shallow rig with the little inline dibber, but that little tiny bristled float is still doing the damage. A jigger was brilliant for spells, but this bristled float seems to be more consistent. Even though these fish are ravenous and they're feeding high up in the water, I still feel that that more subtle rig is catching me more fish. I'm catching a few smaller fish in amongst my better fish with this rig, but I don't see that as a disadvantage. I'm still in the groove putting fish in the net. Now, I'm starting to get more and more better F1s. Fish that are averaging 12 ounce to £1.4. Nice fish, real weight builders. I've got a target weight of over £100 in my mind. So, to attain that weight, you need chunky fish. And these bigger F1s that I seem to be catching now, they're going some way to helping me achieve that target. I'm well aware that with these fish feeding so well, there's probably better ways of catching these fish even faster. Maybe targeting bigger fish by loose feeding pellets instead of the sloppy ground bait. Maybe a combination of the two might just increase the stamp enough to get to a really, really big weight. But you've got to remember, this was a last minute decision to fish this match, so whatever bait I had in the garage, that'll have to do. And it seems to be working just about okay on this occasion. You're probably thinking that the fishing looks really easy here at Shearsby. Well, all the lakes on the complex are ran with fish. The fishing is fantastic across the whole site. One of the lakes in particular, Willow Lake, just round the corner at the bottom of the car park, that lake is ran with F1s. You see them swirling every time you throw any bait in. Really aggressive feeding fish. The venue record's been broken on there recently, £288. And when you realise that the fish in there average about £1 a piece, you can see it's really busy fishing. Like I say, Shearsby Valley, a great place if you want to go and get loads of bites. I've carried on catching shallow for a huge portion of the match, but what you've not seen, because the GoPro battery ran out, was a late spell in the margins. In the last hour, I started feeding some casters 3 or 4 metres down the bank to my left hand side, and I've managed to catch some fish shallow in the edge. I could see some swirls once again, you can see the fish feeding on the bait. I was catching nice big F1s, some chunky carp. I even had some shallow feeding barbel in the margins. It shows how happy these fish are in this lake and how aggressively they're feeding. A really good fish filled day and a really good end to the day. Those late edge fish have pushed me up to £146, which I've managed to win the lake with that. A really fantastic venue, a great place to be, and also a great day's fishing.